I thought I had it all figured out, but when they took my $90,000 savings, I realized I was about to lose everything. That was the thought that crossed my mind as I sat in my car, staring at the notification on my phone. It was a simple text from my parents, *, we've taken the money. It's for the best. *, I didn't know what to feel. My hands trembled as I glanced at the message again, trying to wrap my mind around it. My entire savings, every penny I had worked so hard for over the last 3 years, was gone in an instant. I had always been cautious with my money, investing carefully, keeping track of every dollar. But I had never imagined that my own parents would betray me in such a cold, calculating way. They had always been in control, always making decisions for me, but this felt different. This wasn't just a financial blow, it was a personal one, a blow that felt like it cut right to my core. They didn't know I was in control of something far more valuable than the $90,000 they'd taken. And when they found out, they were going to regret it. That's when I knew it was time for me to change everything. I wasn't going to be their pawn anymore. This wasn't just about money, this was about proving that I was worth more than they ever gave me credit for. But how did I get here? Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a family where appearances mattered more than anything. My father, a successful lawyer, always wore his success like a badge. He believed that the world was divided into winners and losers, and he made it clear that I was supposed to be a winner. My mother, on the other hand, was the one who kept everything running smoothly at home. She was the planner, the organizer, the one who made sure everything looked perfect from the outside. But behind closed doors, things were different. I was always the one who was overlooked, the one who was never quite good enough. My older brother, Adam, was the golden child. He was the one who could do no wrong, the one who always got the attention and the praise. He had always been their favorite, and no matter how hard I tried, I could never measure up to his standards. He was the star athlete, the charming one who made friends effortlessly, the one who always got the praise. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the bookworm, the one who preferred to stay in the background. And while my parents' love for Adam was obvious, mine always felt conditional. It wasn't that they didn't love me, but their love always seemed to come with strings attached. I had to prove myself over and over again, but no matter what I did, it never seemed like enough. When I turned 18, I made the decision to move out. I had to get away from the constant comparisons, the constant feeling that I was living in my brother's shadow. I got a part-time job at a local cafe and started saving up for college. My parents were furious at first, but I was determined. I was going to make it on my own. And for a while, it worked. I managed to put aside enough money to pay for my tuition and living expenses without relying on them. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to be independent, to have control over my own life. But then, my parents made it clear that they expected something in return. They wanted control over my financial decisions, over my future. They insisted that I put my savings into an account they controlled, promising that it would be safer there. But I refused. I knew better than to let them have that kind of power over me. That's when the tension started. They began pushing me harder, reminding me that they had always been the ones to help me, the ones who had supported me all these years. I could hear the disappointment in their voices every time they brought it up. And then, one day it happened. Without warning, they took the $90,000 I had worked so hard to save. They didn't ask, they didn't tell me. They just did it. I was devastated. How could they do this? How could they betray me like this? And then it hit me. They had no idea what I had behind the scenes. They didn't know that I had inherited a small fortune from my grandmother, a fortune that no one in my family knew about. My grandmother had been a successful businesswoman, and when she passed away, she left me a trust fund worth $5 million. She had known how to invest, how to make money work for her, and she had passed that knowledge down to me. It was my secret, my hidden power. And now, I was going to use it. My parents had no idea that I was sitting on a small empire of my own. They had no idea that I was about to change the game. But I couldn't let them know just yet. Not until the time was right. I needed to make sure everything was in place. I started by securing my assets, moving my trust funds into a private account. I met with my lawyer, making sure everything was legally sound. I knew that once I revealed my power, there was no turning back. The next few weeks were intense. My parents tried everything to get me to forgive them, to let them back into my life. They called, they texted, they even showed up at my door pleading with me to forgive them. But I was done. I had spent years playing their game, living in their shadow, and I wasn't going to do it anymore. One day, I called them. I told them to meet me at a cafe downtown. When they arrived, they looked surprised to see me sitting there calm and collected. I could see the guilt in their eyes, the realization that they had lost me. But I wasn't there to make them feel better. I was there to make my move. I told them that I was no longer the same person they had known. I told them that I had control now, that I had something they would never have. And then I revealed it. I showed them the trust fund, the $5 million that was mine, that they had no claim to. Their faces went pale. My father's jaw dropped and my mother's hands trembled. They had no idea what hit them. They thought they had all the power, but they were wrong. And in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their control. I was in charge of my own destiny, and no one, not even my own parents, could take that away from me. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. I stayed in my apartment, going through the motions of daily life, but my mind was consumed with the idea of what I had just revealed to my parents. I knew the situation wasn't over yet. There was no way they would let go of their sense of control so easily. But deep down, I felt a sense of calm. For the first time in my life, I was the one holding the cards. I was in charge. The quiet, overlooked daughter had become the woman who controlled millions. I wasn't the girl they thought they could manipulate anymore. It felt surreal, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But it didn't mean things were easy. The phone calls from my parents kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. They wanted to meet, they wanted to talk. I ignored them at first. There was nothing left to say. But as the days went by, I started to feel a pull. Maybe it was the desire for closure, maybe it was the remnants of the family bond that still lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I caved. I answered their call. "We need to talk," my mother said, her voice soft, pleading. Please, Emily, come over. We're sorry. We never meant to hurt you. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. For years, I had done everything to please them, to make them proud. And now, it seemed like all that effort had been wasted. But I had to remind myself, this wasn't about me pleasing them anymore. This was about me taking control of my own life. I agreed to meet them at a coffee shop the next morning. When I arrived, they were already there, sitting at a small corner table. They looked older somehow, their faces lined with regret. My father was the first to speak. "Emily, we're sorry," he said, his voice shaky. We didn't know, we didn't realize you had that much money. I sat down, my heart pounding in my chest. "You never cared to know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. You took my savings without asking, without even considering how it would affect me. You never saw me for who I really am, did you?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. We were wrong. We should have trusted you. We were just trying to protect you, to help you. I shook my head. Help me. By taking my money. By keeping me in the dark about my own inheritance. There was a long silence between us. I could see the guilt in their eyes, but it didn't change anything. The damage had been done. "You've always seen me as the backup plan," I continued, my voice rising. Asterisk, the one you thought could never succeed without you. But now I have something you can never take from me. I'm not that girl anymore. I don't need your approval, and I don't need your control. I've built my own future. Asterisk, my father looked down at his hands, his face pale. I know we've made mistakes, he whispered. Asterisk, but can't we fix this? We're still family, Emily. We can start over. Asterisk, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything I had just said. It was hard to let go of the idea of family, of the bond one had always thought was unbreakable. But I knew in my heart that I had already made my decision. Asterisk, family. Asterisk, I repeated, almost bitterly. Asterisk, you don't get to define family anymore. I've learned that the hard way. Asterisk, my mother reached across the table, her hand trembling. Emily, please, but I pulled back, shaking my head. Asterisk, no, Mom. This is over. I'm done trying to earn your love. I don't need it. Not anymore. Asterisk, the finality in my voice seemed to hit them both hard. They didn't know what to say. They just sat there, stunned, as I stood up and walked out. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. But above all, I felt free. I had finally done what I needed to do. I had finally taken control. I didn't look back. I went home that night and started making plans for the future. I wasn't going to live in the shadow of my parents' expectations anymore. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life. I was going to build something for myself. And with the $5 million at my disposal, I had everything I needed to do just that. The next few months were a whirlwind of changes. I began making strategic investments, growing the trust fund my grandmother had left me. I hired a financial advisor. Someone I trusted to help me make smart choices with my newfound wealth. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about creating a life I was proud of, a life that was entirely my own. As the months passed, I became more and more confident. I knew that I had made the right choice. And when my parents called again, months later, I was no longer the same person they had tried to control. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had built something real, something that couldn't be taken from me. I was no longer their little girl. I was a woman with a future, with power, and with the ability to make my own decisions. And no one, not even my parents, could take that away from me. The next few weeks felt like an emotional roller coaster. I had taken a giant leap forward, finally stepping into the life I had always dreamed of. But with that came a sense of loneliness I wasn't prepared for. I thought that once I severed ties with my parents, things would be easier, that the weight of their control would disappear. And in many ways it did. But the silence was deafening. I found myself questioning whether I had made the right choice, especially when the loneliness crept in at night. My apartment, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt cold, empty. I started pouring myself into work, into building the life I wanted. But every time I thought of my parents, I couldn't help but wonder if they ever thought about me. It was a strange feeling, being free, but still haunted by the ghosts of my past. The phone rang one evening as I was sitting at my desk, going over some investment reports. The caller ID read *, Mom. *, I stared at the screen for a few seconds, hesitating. I had avoided their calls for months, but something in me felt like I needed to pick up this time. Hello. I said, my voice steady but guarded. Emily. My mother's voice came through, shaky. I know you don't want to talk to us, but please just listen. There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing heavily, like she was struggling to find the right words. I never meant to hurt you, she continued. We were wrong. We thought we were doing what was best for you, but I see now how much damage we caused. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to hang up, to reject the apology that felt so long overdue. But another part of me that was still that little girl craving her parents' love, wanted to hear her out. We've been talking a lot, my mother went on. Your father and we've realized how much we've lost. And we don't want to lose you, Emily. Please, let us make it right. We can't change the past, but we can try to fix things. My heart ached as I listened to her. The woman who had once made me feel like I wasn't enough, the woman who had taken my savings without a second thought, was now begging me for forgiveness. I wanted to be strong, to stand my ground and keep my distance. But the vulnerability in her voice, the years of pent-up regret, it all hit me like a wave. I don't know if we can fix this, I said, the words coming out softer than I intended. I'm not the same person I was before. I've changed and I can't go back to how things were. I've built something for myself now. I'm not that girl anymore. I don't need your approval to succeed. There was another long silence. I could hear my mother sniffing, trying to keep her emotions in check. I know, sweetheart, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you don't need us anymore. But we still love you. And we want to be part of your life again, if you'll let us. I sat back in my chair, staring at the wall, unsure of what to say. On one hand, I was proud of myself for getting to where I was, for building my own success without their help. On the other hand, I couldn't deny the emptiness I still felt, the part of me that longed for the family I had lost. I don't know, I said finally, my voice strained. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did. But I can't pretend like nothing happened either. It's going to take time, if it's even possible. My mother didn't say anything for a while, and I could tell she was crying. It broke my heart, but I knew I couldn't give in. I understand, she said eventually. Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready. After that, I hung up the phone. I sat in silence, trying to process everything that had just happened. I didn't feel the rush of relief I thought I would. Instead, I felt a weight, a burden that was still there, even if it was lighter than before. I realized that no matter how much success I had, no matter how much money I controlled, there would always be a part of me that felt incomplete. I had built my life from the ground up, but there were pieces of my past I couldn't just erase. As the days went by, I kept busy. I worked harder than ever to expand my investments, to make my trust fund grow even more. I started networking with new people, people who saw me for who I was, not for who I was supposed to be. I even made new friends, friends who didn't know my story, friends who treated me like an equal. But the tension with my parents remained. They kept calling, sending messages, asking to meet. Every time I thought about seeing them again, I felt a mix of guilt and anger. I knew I wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet. But part of me also knew that forgiveness wasn't just for them, it was for me. I had spent so many years trying to please them, trying to live up to their expectations. Now, I had to learn how to forgive them, not for their sake but for mine. I couldn't let their mistakes define my future any longer. I had to take the next step to finally let go of the past, so I could continue moving forward. And so, I made a decision. I would meet them again. But this time, it would be on my terms. This time, I would be the one in control. The day I decided to meet my parents again felt surreal. I had spent so many months, even years, avoiding this moment. But now, with everything that had happened, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I had to face them, and I had to do it on my terms. I stood in front of my mirror, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that had settled in my stomach. I had already built my life, my future, but there was still a part of me that wasn't sure I was ready to let go of the past. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident but not overly showy. I didn't want them to think I was trying too hard to impress them. This was not about seeking approval, it was about confronting them, and about standing firm in who I had become. When I arrived at the cafe, I could already see them sitting at a corner table, just like the last time. They looked older, somehow more fragile than I remembered. My father's posture was slouched and my mother, who had once been so vibrant, now seemed smaller, almost diminished. I could see the tension in their faces, the fear of what this conversation might bring. As I walked toward them, I felt a knot tighten in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I had come this far, and I wasn't going to turn back now. "Emily," my mother said softly as I sat down across from them. Her voice was full of uncertainty, and I could hear the years of regret and longing in it. We've been waiting for this moment for so long. We just want you back in our lives. We've made so many mistakes and we're sorry. I looked at her, then at my father. They were sitting there, looking at me with eyes full of expectation, as if this moment would somehow make everything better. But I knew it wasn't that simple. I had changed. I was no longer the girl who had needed their approval. "I'm not here for an apology," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm here because I need you to understand something. I've built my own life now. I've done things on my own, without your help. And I'm proud of that. But I can't pretend like nothing happened. You took something from me, something I worked hard for, and it changed everything." My father shifted in his seat, his face clouded with guilt. "We were wrong, Emily," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I know we made mistakes. We shouldn't have taken your savings, we shouldn't have tried to control your future. We've spent so many years thinking we knew what was best for you, but we were wrong." I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. It was hard to hear, but I knew it was the truth. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, trying to prove I was worth something. But in the end, I had proven something to myself. "I've learned a lot in the past few months," I continued. I've learned that I don't need you to validate me. I don't need you to fix the past. What I need is for you to understand that I've moved on. And that I can't go back to the way things were." There was a long pause. My parents exchanged a look, their faces filled with sadness, as if they had known this day would come but were still unprepared for it. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it on mine. "We don't want to lose you, Emily," she said, her voice barely a whisper. We've been selfish. We've treated you like you were always the one who would just follow along. But we see that you're strong. And we've come to realize that we don't have the right to control your life anymore." Her words were hard to swallow, but they were what I needed to hear. This wasn't about forgiveness, not yet. This was about acceptance, about moving forward. "I don't need your permission anymore," I said, my voice steady. I've made my own choices, and I'm proud of who I am. But I also need you to understand that I can't go back to the way things were. I can't keep pretending like you didn't take something from me. I can't forget the way you tried to control me." My father nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and understanding. "We never meant to hurt you, Emily," he said quietly. We were just trying to protect you in our own way. But we see now that we've done more harm than good. We'll respect your decision, whatever it may be." I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet. But I could see that they were genuinely trying to understand to make things right. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. "I'm not sure what the future holds for us," I said softly. But I do know that I'm not the same person I was before. And I can't go back to being the daughter you expected me to be. I'm not that girl anymore." My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father's face softened. "We just want to be a part of your life, Emily," my mother whispered. "If you'll let us." I looked at them both, the people who had once controlled my every move, the ones who had taken everything I had worked for. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt something different, something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were, I said slowly. But I'm willing to try. On my terms. My parents nodded, their eyes filled with gratitude. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a step forward. And for now, that was enough. I didn't need to make them understand everything. I didn't need to fix the past. I just needed to move forward, and that was exactly what I was going to do. The next few months were a slow and steady climb back to a place where I could finally breathe, without the constant pressure of my past weighing on me. After that meeting with my parents, I felt a sense of closure, but I knew the road to true freedom wasn't going to be immediate. It wasn't just about building my financial empire, or securing the $5 million trust fund that I now controlled. It was about redefining who I was, and what I wanted from life. The decisions I had made in the past, the choices I had made to distance myself from the people who had once been my family, had shaped me into the woman I was today. But I knew I couldn't just focus on the money or the business side of things. I needed balance. I needed to find a way to move forward emotionally, to fill the emptiness that still lingered. One day, as I sat in my favorite cafe, working on a new investment strategy, I overheard a conversation at the table next to me. Two women were discussing how their lives had been impacted by their families. One had left a controlling partner, the other had separated from her toxic family. The words freedom and self-worth kept popping up in their conversation, and something about it struck a chord deep inside me. I had made so many decisions based on what others thought was best for me. But now I realized I needed to make decisions based on what I wanted. I had always been the person who adapted to others, who tried to make everyone else happy. But now, with the money and the freedom to do whatever I pleased, it was time to be true to myself. That night, after finishing my work for the day, I took a walk through the city, letting the cool air clear my mind. I thought about how much I had grown since that first phone call from my parents, how much I had changed in the months that followed. But I also thought about the woman I had been, the girl who had stayed in the background, trying so hard to please everyone around her. I wasn't that person anymore. As I walked, I noticed a small art gallery I had passed by 1,000 times before. I had always been curious about the art inside, but had never taken the time to stop. Something about it called to me that night. I walked in, and as I wandered through the rooms, I felt a sense of peace. The paintings, the sculptures, the photographs, each one spoke to me in a way I hadn't expected. I realized then that I had been missing something in my life, creativity. I had spent so much time focused on business, on money, on proving myself to others, that I had forgotten how to nurture the parts of me that truly made me happy. It was in that moment, standing in front of a canvas that captured the beauty of a sunset over the ocean, that I made a decision. I was going to invest in myself, not just financially, but emotionally, creatively. I was going to learn how to paint, to express myself in a way I had never allowed myself to before. The next day, I signed up for a painting class. I had no idea what I was doing, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. I wasn't trying to be good at it. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was doing it for me. The weeks that followed were transformative. I spent my evenings painting, experimenting with colors and brushstrokes, creating things that were purely mine. I couldn't remember the last time I had allowed myself to do something just for the joy of it. The more I painted, the more I realized that this was the missing piece in my life. My work was important, yes, but it wasn't everything. The creative side of me, the part that had been neglected for so long, was now coming to life. Slowly, I started to share my work with friends, and to my surprise, they loved it. Some even suggested I consider selling my paintings. I was taken aback. I had never thought of myself as an artist. But maybe I was. Maybe this was the path I was meant to take all along. As my confidence in my art grew, so did my understanding of myself. I wasn't just the girl with a trust fund or a successful career. I was someone who had the ability to create, to express, and to share my vision with the world. I wasn't just trying to prove my worth to others anymore. I was living for myself, doing what made me happy. And that, I realized, was the real success. My relationship with my parents, too, began to shift. After months of space and reflection, I reached out to them again. This time, I didn't need anything from them. I wasn't seeking their approval or forgiveness. I simply wanted to reconnect on my terms. We met at a quiet park, and when we saw each other, it wasn't filled with the tension of our past. It wasn't about what they had done, or what I had lost, it was about moving forward. We talked not as parent and child, but as people, two adults who had been through something difficult and had come out on the other side. We didn't fix everything, but we made progress. The guilt I had once carried began to lift, replaced with understanding and acceptance. It was strange, but in that moment, I realized that I had forgiven them, not because they deserved it, but because I needed it for myself. Life had changed, and so had I. The woman sitting here now wasn't the same one who had once been trapped by her parents' expectations. She wasn't the girl who had given away her power. She was someone who had taken control, built a future, and learned to love herself. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of my past. I had created a new identity, one that was strong, independent, and free. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had found peace, not in the approval of others, but in the knowledge that I had finally become the person I was always meant to be. As the months went by, life began to feel more settled, but a new layer of complexity started to surface. With my newfound peace, my art career was taking off in ways I hadn't anticipated. The small gallery I had first walked into had invited me to showcase my work. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to step into the spotlight. But when I stood in front of my paintings, my thoughts cleared. I had spent so much time focused on external approval that I had forgotten what it felt like to create something purely for the joy of it. It wasn't about making money, though I knew that would come. It was about sharing a piece of myself with the world. My first show was a success, and it changed something in me. I realized that this was my true path, not just as an investor, not just as the daughter of my parents, but as an artist. The freedom I had so desperately craved was here, in the form of these brushstrokes and colors. But just as I was beginning to find myself, the past seemed to creep in again. My parents, while no longer able to control me, still had an undeniable impact on my life. Their constant calls and messages had slowed, but one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from them. As I opened it, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach. Inside was a formal apology, not just for taking my money, but for the years of neglect, the favoritism, and the emotional manipulation. They expressed their desire to make amends, to find a way to rebuild what had been broken. I had always known they were sorry, but there was something different about this letter. They weren't just asking for forgiveness, they were asking for my help. They had lost their fortune. My father's investments had fallen apart, and their savings had been wiped out in a series of bad business decisions. For the first time in my life, I saw them for who they really were, vulnerable, lost, and human. The request was simple, we need you, Emily. We need your help. For a moment, I was paralyzed. A part of me wanted to turn away, to remind them of everything they had done, to say no and walk away for good. But I had learned a lot in the past few months. I had learned that forgiving didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean going back to the way things were. It meant accepting the past for what it was and moving forward with the strength I had gained. I picked up the phone and called my parents. "I've received your letter," I said, my voice calm but firm. And I've been thinking about it. There was a silence on the other end. I could feel the anticipation. "I'm not going to give you all my money," I continued, but I will help. I'll help you rebuild, but only if you let me do it on my terms. They agreed, of course. They had no choice. What they didn't realize was that this was not just a financial transaction, it was a turning point. This was the moment when I took control, not just over my money, but over my relationship with them. I wasn't going to be their savior, but I was willing to guide them in the right direction. Over the next few months, I worked with my parents to help them get back on their feet. We went over their finances together, reorganized their debts, and I helped them get back into real estate investments, this time in a way that was both smart and sustainable. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks and there were moments when I wanted to throw in the towel and walk away from them for good. But I kept reminding myself of the bigger picture. This was my chance to show them that I was capable, not just of succeeding on my own, but of being the person they never thought I could be. And in a way, this process of helping them rebuild became a metaphor for my own journey. I was rebuilding my own life in a way I had never imagined. The woman who had once been a shadow of her parents' expectations was now standing tall, helping them find their way back. As time passed, our relationship began to shift. It wasn't perfect and it never would be. But I saw a change in them. They weren't asking for my approval anymore. They were listening to me, respecting my decisions and acknowledging my success. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly earned their respect, not because of what I could give them, but because of who I had become. I was no longer the girl who lived in the background. I was no longer the daughter who tried to prove herself worthy of their love. I was the woman who had built her own life, who had taken control, and who was now standing in the light of her own accomplishments. And as I stood there, watching my parents slowly begin to rebuild their own lives, I realized something important. I had finally found the freedom I had been searching for all these years. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about power, it was about being true to myself, about choosing my own path, and standing firm in who I was. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I had created something new, and that was the most powerful thing of all. Months had passed since my parents and I started working together to rebuild what had once been a broken relationship. I could feel the change in the air, but I also knew the true test would come when the dust finally settled. The past, despite the efforts to forgive and move forward, was still there, lurking in the background, and I wasn't sure if we had truly healed, or if we were simply covering up the cracks. But one thing was certain, I was no longer the same person who had walked away from them months ago. I had learned how to make decisions for myself, to embrace the freedom I had fought so hard to claim. As I sat at my desk late one evening, reviewing my investment portfolio, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my father. Emily, we've made some progress, but there's something we need to discuss. My heart skipped a beat. I had grown used to working with them, but this felt different. They had made it clear that their financial troubles weren't over, but we had made strides. I set down my phone, pushing aside the nagging feeling that something was wrong. When I called him back, his voice sounded strained, more anxious than usual. We've been offered a deal, he said. It could help us get back on track, but I need your help. We need your expertise to make the right decision. I hesitated. Helping them had always come with a price, expectations that had been placed on me from a young age. But this time, it was different. I wasn't doing this out of obligation. I wasn't doing this to prove my worth. I was doing it because I had the ability to make a difference, and because I had learned to make decisions on my terms. I agreed to meet them the next morning. The meeting took place at their house, the place that once felt like a prison to me, but now felt like just another building in the city. I was no longer emotionally tethered to it, and that realization gave me a sense of strength I had never had before. When I walked through the door, I was greeted by my parents, both of them looking more anxious than I had ever seen them. They were sitting at the kitchen table, papers scattered in front of them, as if they had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Emily, thank you for coming, my mother said softly. We need your help. This deal is our last chance to fix everything. I glanced at the papers in front of them. The deal was complicated, an investment opportunity with a new real estate venture that promised to deliver high returns, but it came with significant risk. I could see the worry in my father's eyes as he looked at me. We can't do this without you, he added. Asterisk, we know we've made mistakes, but we need your expertise to make the right decision. Asterisk, I paused, taking in their words. I had helped them before, but this time felt different. This wasn't about fixing their mistakes. It was about making a choice that would affect not just their future, but mine as well. I sat down at the table, carefully reviewing the papers in front of me. I knew what I had to do. You're asking me to take a risk, I said, finally breaking the silence. Asterisk, and you're asking me to trust that this deal is the right one for all of us. Asterisk, my parents nodded, waiting for me to continue. I've learned a lot in the past few months, I said slowly. Asterisk, I've learned that I can't just follow what others tell me to do. I've learned to trust my instincts and make decisions based on what I believe is right, not what others expect from me. Asterisk, I looked at them both, feeling a mixture of emotions. This wasn't just about business, this was about me taking control of my own life and helping them without losing myself in the process. I will help you, I said, my voice steady. Asterisk, but we are doing this my way. I will help you assess the risks, and I will help you move forward, but this time, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I believe in what we can accomplish together. But you have to let me lead. Asterisk, there was a long pause, and I could see the realization in their eyes. They weren't used to me taking charge, to me making decisions that weren't in line with their expectations. But in that moment, I knew they understood. They had to trust me. This wasn't about their control over me anymore, it was about working together as equals. Thank you, Emily, my father said quietly. Asterisk, we know we've been hard on you. We're proud of you. Asterisk, I nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle in. It wasn't just about money or success, it was about respect, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was getting the respect I deserved. Over the next few weeks, we worked together to finalize the deal. It wasn't easy, but it was a process that taught me something important. I didn't need my parents' approval to be successful. I didn't need them to define who I was. But I could still help them, still be a part of their lives, without losing myself in the process. As the deal went through and their business slowly began to recover, I realized that I had finally come full circle. I had learned to build my own life, to embrace my own power, and to forgive my parents for their mistakes. But more than that, I had learned to trust myself. I had learned that I could be both strong and compassionate, both independent and connected. I had built something that was mine, and no one could take that away from me. And in that moment, I knew that the woman I had become was someone I could be proud of, a woman who had found her own path, and had the strength to walk it, no matter where it led. As the year came to a close, I found myself standing at the edge of a new chapter. My parents' business had stabilized, and their relationship with me had evolved in ways I never thought possible. It was a slow process, but we had finally reached a point of understanding. They had learned to respect me, not just as their daughter, but as an equal. I had proven to myself that I could stand on my own, build my own success, and still have room in my heart for the people who had once controlled my life. But even as everything seemed to be falling into place, there was a lingering feeling, one I couldn't shake. I had become the person I was meant to be, but was I truly ready to move on from the past? The answer was more complicated than I had anticipated. It wasn't just about the money or the business. It was about the deep emotional healing that I had never fully allowed myself to experience. I had spent so many years focusing on external achievements, my career, my investments, my art, that I had neglected the parts of me that needed true healing. My parents' actions had left scars on me, and while I had forgiven them, I had never fully processed the pain of growing up in their shadow. One evening, as I sat in my studio, working on a new painting, I realized something. I had been so focused on proving myself that I hadn't taken the time to simply be. I hadn't allowed myself to sit with the emotions that had shaped my life. I had spent so much of my energy on moving forward that I had neglected the need to look back and understand the journey. That night, I decided it was time for me to face those emotions. I had to go deeper than just forgiveness. I had to allow myself to grieve the girl I once was, the girl who had always been overlooked, the girl who had always felt invisible in her own family. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my parents and told them that I needed some time to reflect, to process everything that had happened. I wasn't walking away from them, but I needed to step back from everything else for a while. I needed space to find the parts of myself that had been buried for so long. They understood. They didn't fight me on it, and that was something I hadn't expected. I spent the following weeks focusing on my own emotional healing. I started therapy, something I had put off for years. I learned to recognize the ways in which my past had shaped me, but I also learned to release the hold it had on me. I spent time alone, allowing myself to feel all the emotions I had suppressed for so long, anger, sadness, fear, but also relief and joy. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was one that I needed to take. As the months went by, I began to understand something important. I had always believed that in order to be successful, I had to prove my worth to others. I had spent so much time chasing external validation, trying to live up to other people's expectations, that I had lost sight of my own needs. But now, I realized that true success wasn't just about what I achieved or how others saw me. It was about being at peace with who I was, about embracing my imperfections, my flaws, and my strengths. I wasn't defined by the mistakes of my past. I wasn't defined by my parents' actions or by the expectations of others. I was defined by who I chose to be in this moment. One day, as I stood in front of my latest painting, a work that felt more personal than anything I had ever created before, I knew that I had found the missing piece. I was no longer trying to fill a void. I had found my purpose, my voice, and I had learned to trust myself. The next time I spoke to my parents, it was different. We talked not just about the business or the investments, but about who we had become as individuals. We acknowledged the pain of the past, but we also celebrated the growth we had all experienced. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that, I realized, was the key to healing. I wasn't seeking perfection anymore. I was seeking peace. And I had finally found it. As the year drew to a close, I stood at the threshold of a new chapter, not just in my career but in my life. The woman I had become was stronger than the girl I had once been. She was no longer defined by her past, by her parents' expectations, or by the mistakes she had made. She was defined by the choices she had made in the present moment, by the woman she was becoming. And in that moment, I knew that I was ready for whatever the future held. It had been a few months since I had reached a place of peace, both with my parents and with myself. The healing was slow, but it was steady, and I had found a new rhythm in my life. I had stopped waiting for validation from others. I had stopped living for someone else's expectations. I was living for myself. As I continued to work on my art and invest in projects that mattered to me, I realized there was more to life than just professional success. I had learned how to thrive in a world that once seemed overwhelming, how to create something meaningful out of my own struggles. But there was one thing that I hadn't fully addressed yet, my relationship with my parents. We had come a long way, but I knew there was still a lot left unsaid. They had apologized, they had made amends, but there was still a gap between us. It wasn't about the money or the business anymore. It was about something deeper, something I couldn't ignore. I had to ask myself the hard question, what do I truly want from them now? The answer wasn't simple, and it wasn't something I could figure out overnight. But it was something I couldn't avoid forever. So I decided to take the next step. I reached out to them and asked if we could meet. Not to discuss business, not to talk about investments, but just to talk, to have an honest conversation about where we stood as a family. They agreed, of course, and we set a date for a weekend afternoon. When the day came, I found myself nervous. For all the growth I had experienced, this still felt like uncharted territory. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, but I knew that this conversation would help me determine how much further I was willing to go in rebuilding our bond. I arrived at their house, and as I stepped inside, I was struck by how different it felt. It wasn't the same place I had once dreaded. There was a sense of openness now, a sense that we were all, in our own ways, moving forward. My parents greeted me warmly, but there was still a bit of hesitation in the air. They were waiting for me to speak first. I sat down at the kitchen table, looking at them both. I've been thinking a lot about where we stand, I began. We've come a long way since everything fell apart, but I need to know if we're really on the same page. I don't want to keep going in circles, and I don't want to hold on to any more anger or resentment. I've let go of so much already, but there's one thing I need to ask from both of you. My parents nodded, their faces full of anticipation. What is it, Emily? My father asked quietly. I need to know that we're no longer trying to control each other's lives, I said, my voice steady but firm. I need to know that we're both free to live our own lives, without the pressure of expectations, without the constant fear of disappointing each other. There was a long silence, and for a moment, I wondered if I had said too much, asked for too much. But then my mother spoke. We've spent so many years trying to make everything perfect, trying to mold you into what we thought was best, she said softly. We didn't see the damage we were causing. But I understand now. We've been holding on to our own fears, and we've tried to make you carry them with us. It's not right, and I'm sorry for that. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, and I knew this was the turning point. We were finally facing the truth. I wasn't asking them to be perfect, and I didn't need them to be. What I needed was for us to be real, to acknowledge the past and accept that we were all human, flawed, but capable of change. I need to know that you're both okay with the person I've become, I continued. That you understand I'm not the person I once was. I'm not the girl who lived in your shadow anymore. I've built my own life, and I need you to respect that. My father looked at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, he nodded slowly. I've seen it, Emily. I've seen the woman you've become. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. My mother, too, nodded in agreement. We've been hard on you, and we've been afraid of letting go. But we can't control you anymore. We have to let you live your life. And we have to learn to live our own lives, too. I felt the weight of the years lift off my shoulders, but it wasn't just because of what they had said. It was because, in that moment, I realized something important. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I had forgiven them, and I had forgiven myself. We were no longer trapped in the cycle of blame and regret. We were free. As the conversation continued, we talked more about our hopes for the future. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step forward, a step toward a relationship that was based on mutual respect and understanding. When I left their house that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had gotten what I needed, not just from them, but from myself. I had finally allowed myself to let go, to embrace the freedom that came with healing. The woman I had become wasn't just defined by her struggles or by her past. She was defined by her choices, by the path she had chosen to walk, and by the strength she had found in herself. I was no longer the girl who lived in the shadow of her parents. I was the woman who had built her own future, her own identity. And nothing, not even the past, could take that away from me. The months following that conversation with my parents felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. I had forgiven them, but more importantly, I had forgiven myself. There was a sense of peace that had settled in me, something I had never thought possible after everything we had been through. I had come to realize that healing wasn't about fixing everything or even about understanding every detail of the past. It was about accepting it, letting go of the weight of resentment, and moving forward with the strength I had built along the way. I had been living on my own terms for so long, creating a life that was uniquely mine, that I wasn't sure what the future would look like when I allowed myself to consider something more. For so many years, I had been focused on success, business, money, art. But now, I found myself wondering what would come next. Was there more to life than what I had already accomplished? I had reached a point where I was no longer chasing anything, but I was also unsure of what I truly wanted. It was a strange feeling, one that left me with a sense of uncertainty, but not in a negative way. It was a new kind of freedom, freedom to choose, freedom to grow, freedom to make mistakes without the constant fear of judgment or failure. One afternoon, while taking a break from my studio, I decided to go for a walk. The weather was perfect, clear skies, the air just cool enough to make the breeze feel refreshing. As I walked through the park, I noticed how peaceful everything seemed. People were walking their dogs, children were playing, and for a moment, I just stood there taking it all in. It was in this moment that I realized something. I had been so focused on what I was building, on the tangible success I could see, that I had forgotten to enjoy the simple things in life. For so long, I had equated my worth with what I could accomplish. But standing there in the quiet of the park, I realized that my worth wasn't tied to any achievement or possession. It was tied to who I was at my core. I didn't need to constantly prove myself to anyone. I didn't need to meet anyone's expectations. The only expectation that mattered now was my own. That evening, I sat down with my sketchpad, something I hadn't done in a while. I began drawing, not with any goal in mind, but simply because it felt good. The act of creating for the sake of creating was something I had lost touch with in the rush of building my future. But that night, as the lines and shapes began to take form, I felt that old spark of inspiration ignite inside me. I had been so caught up in the idea of success that I had forgotten why I started creating in the first place, for the joy it brought me. As I continued to draw, I realized that I wasn't done yet. There was more to discover about myself, more to explore. I had spent so much of my life focusing on survival, on building something that would prove my worth, that I had never really allowed myself to dream. But now, I was free to dream. I was free to explore new possibilities without the weight of others' expectations bearing down on me. The next day, I received a call from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She was starting a new project and wanted me to be a part of it. The opportunity wasn't something I had been expecting, but it felt like a sign. This was something different, a chance to work on something I had never done before. It wasn't about the money or the success. It was about the challenge, the experience, and the growth that came with it. I agreed to meet with her, and as we talked about the project, I felt something shift inside me. This was exactly what I needed, something new, something that pushed me outside of my comfort zone. I realized that the next step in my journey wasn't about staying in the safety of what I knew. It was about taking risks, embracing uncertainty, and allowing myself to evolve into the person I was meant to be. I didn't know where this new path would lead, but I was excited to find out. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive, not because of any external validation, but because I was doing something for the sheer joy of it. As I left the meeting, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The future wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace, with open arms and an open heart. I had built a life for myself that was free from the expectations of others, and now, I was free to choose my own direction. I had learned that success didn't mean following a predetermined path. It meant creating my own. And as I moved forward, I was ready to face whatever came next with the confidence that I had the power to shape my own future. The next few months unfolded like a series of small but significant victories. I was learning to embrace the idea of change, not just in the external world but deep within myself. The project my friend had invited me to join turned out to be exactly what I needed, a way to stretch my creativity and dive into something new, something completely outside of my comfort zone. It wasn't easy, but it was exhilarating. It reminded me of the reasons I had started this journey in the first place, to discover new passions, to create, and to experience life on my own terms. It was like a breath of fresh air, and with it came a new sense of purpose. As the project progressed, I found myself reconnecting with a part of me I hadn't known I'd lost. I had spent so much of my life focusing on the financial and professional aspects of success that I had neglected the importance of personal fulfillment. But now, with every new challenge and every new opportunity, I was rediscovering my love for the process of creation. This wasn't about the outcome or the recognition. It was about the joy of building something from nothing, of taking risks and exploring uncharted territory. But even as I embraced this new chapter, there was still something on my mind, something I hadn't fully addressed yet. The relationship with my parents, though improved, still had unresolved layers. We had made progress, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to our story, more that we needed to confront. I couldn't deny the fact that my parents, despite their attempts to change, still held a place in my heart. They had hurt me, yes, but they had also shown vulnerability, and in doing so, they had allowed me to see them as human beings, not just the figures of authority that I had grown up with. The question was, could I truly move forward without fully confronting the past? I had spent so much time focusing on my own growth, on creating my own identity, that I had neglected to address the emotional residue that lingered. It wasn't about asking for more from my parents, but about finding closure within myself. So I decided to reach out to them again. Not to fix anything, not to ask for something in return, but simply to have a conversation, to truly let go. When I called them, my father answered the phone. His voice, though familiar, was softer now. "Emily," he said, "what can we do for you?" I hesitated for a moment. It wasn't easy to put the words together, but I knew I had to. "I think it's time for us to talk again," I said. But not about business. Not about the past. Just about us. About where we are now, and where we want to go. There was a pause on the other end. "We'd like that," he said finally. We've been waiting for this moment. The meeting was set for the following weekend. As the day approached, I felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. We had come so far, but I still wasn't sure if I was ready to fully let go. I arrived at their house on a Saturday afternoon, the same house that once felt like a place of constant tension, but now felt different, softer, warmer. When I walked in, my parents greeted me with open arms, their faces filled with hope, but also with uncertainty. We sat down in the living room, a familiar space, but with a sense of newness that filled the air. "I've been thinking a lot," I began. About everything we've been through, and where we stand now. My parents listened intently, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and vulnerability. I could see the love in their eyes, but I also saw the weight of the years they had spent trying to make up for their mistakes. "I've forgiven you," I said quietly, "but I think what I need now is to forgive myself." My mother reached out to take my hand. "You've forgiven us," she said, her voice cracking slightly. But you don't need to carry the burden of what we did. We've wronged you, and we've spent so long trying to make it right, but it's up to you to heal. We're just glad that you're here now." There was a profound silence in the room, as I let her words sink in. I had spent so much time trying to understand them, trying to make sense of their mistakes, that I had forgotten the most important part of healing, accepting the pain and moving forward without holding on to it. "I'm ready to move forward," I said, my voice filled with certainty. Not just with you, but with myself. I've learned that I don't need to carry the past with me anymore. I can let it go. My father nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "We've learned so much from you, Emily," he said. You've shown us what it means to live freely, to live without fear of what others expect of you. You've taught us more than we could ever teach you." That moment, sitting there with my parents, surrounded by the remnants of our past, but also by the hope of our future, was a turning point. I wasn't holding on to anger anymore. I wasn't letting the past define me. I had learned to accept it, to embrace it as a part of my story, but I had also learned that I could move beyond it. The road ahead wasn't always clear, but I was ready to walk it with open arms and a full heart. I wasn't just walking toward the future, I was embracing it fully, with all the uncertainty, the joy, and the possibilities it held. And as I left their house that afternoon, I knew that I had taken the final step in my journey, not just toward success but toward peace. I had found my place in the world, and no one could take that away from me. The months that followed were quieter, but in the best way possible. My relationship with my parents had found a delicate balance. We were no longer bound by the heavy chains of expectation, control, and resentment. Instead, we had built something new, a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. The healing process was never linear, but with each passing day, I grew more confident in the strength I had found within myself. I had finally come to terms with the idea that I was my own person, not defined by my past or by the expectations of anyone else. I was free to live my life, to make my own decisions, and to continue growing as an individual. My art, too, had become a reflection of that freedom. I had immersed myself in creative projects that felt more authentic than ever before. Each painting, each sculpture, was an expression of my journey, my triumphs, and my healing. It wasn't about the fame or recognition anymore. It was about capturing a part of me, a part of my story, in a way that felt true and honest. One evening, as I stood in front of a new painting, a piece that felt deeply personal, I realized how far I had come. The woman I was now was not the same one who had left her parents' house in search of independence. She wasn't the woman who had built a career just to prove herself worthy. No, this woman was someone who had embraced her flaws, accepted her past, and was no longer running from anything. She was confident, at peace with herself, and in control of her own future. And that realization made me smile. But just as I was starting to feel like I had everything figured out, life threw me a curveball. It wasn't something big or dramatic. It was a simple conversation, one that came out of nowhere, but one that I had been dreading for a long time. It was from my mother. "Emily, we've been thinking a lot," she said when I answered the phone. We'd like to talk to you about something. Her voice had a hint of hesitation, and I could hear the uncertainty in her words. For a moment, I was silent. I knew what she was going to say. They had always found ways to bring up uncomfortable topics, but this time, it wasn't about business or money. "Of course, Mom," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. What's going on?" "We've been talking about the future," she said. "And we want to know if you would be willing to help us with something, one last time." I felt my stomach tighten. My mind raced as I tried to prepare for what was coming. "What do you need, Mom?" I asked, trying to sound neutral. She paused for a moment before continuing. "We're not asking for money. We've managed to get by, but we're both getting older, Emily. And we're worried about what will happen when we're not around anymore. We don't want to burden you, but we don't know what else to do." My heart sank. I could feel the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. I had worked so hard to get to a place where I was no longer a product of my parents' expectations. I had fought for my independence, for my peace. But now, it seemed like they were asking for something more. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What exactly are you asking, Mom?" I asked carefully. "What do you need from me?" "We want to make sure we've set everything up for the future," she said, her voice softer now. "We're not asking you to fix everything, but we want to know that you'll be there, that you'll help if something happens. We just want to know that we're not alone in this." I felt a mixture of emotions swirling inside me, guilt, fear, and the overwhelming need to protect myself from being pulled back into their world of control. But there was something else too, something that had been buried under the years of resentment. A part of me still cared for them, still wanted to help them, even if I wasn't sure how much I could give. "I'll help," I said after a long pause. But we're going to do this differently. I can't go back to the way things were. I can help, but I need to do it on my terms." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could feel my mother's relief. "We understand, Emily," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We don't want to control you anymore. We just need to know that we're not asking too much." Asterisk, I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Asterisk, I'll help you set things up, but I'm not going to take on everything. I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself too. Asterisk, as the conversation ended, I felt a weight settle in my chest. It wasn't the burden I had feared, but it wasn't an easy request either. I had already given so much, and now, I was being asked to take on even more. But as I reflected on the conversation, I realized something important. I wasn't the same person who had been controlled by their expectations. I wasn't the same person who had been trapped in their world. I had the power to decide what I could give and what I couldn't. And that was the most empowering realization of all. I didn't have to carry the weight of their past mistakes. I could choose how much I was willing to help, and I could do it from a place of strength, not obligation. As I sat back in my chair, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had come a long way, farther than I had ever imagined. And with each step, I was getting closer to the person I was meant to be. I wasn't defined by my past anymore. I was free. And nothing, not even my parents, could take that away from me. It had been months since that conversation with my parents, and everything had changed. The weight that once hung between us was gone, replaced by a new sense of respect and understanding. I had set boundaries, not out of anger, but out of love for myself and for them. I had learned that the key to healing wasn't just about forgiving others, it was about forgiving myself and giving myself the space to grow. The project I had embarked on with my friend had blossomed into something beautiful. I had pushed myself beyond my limits, not just in terms of creativity, but in terms of my personal growth. I was no longer the same person I had been when I first left my parents' house. I had learned to take risks, to embrace the unknown, and to trust myself in a way that I never had before. The painting that had started as a simple idea now represented so much more. It wasn't just a piece of art, it was a testament to the strength and resilience I had found within myself. And as I looked at it, I realized that it was time for me to let go of the past entirely. I didn't need to keep it in my life anymore. I could cherish the lessons it had taught me, but I no longer had to carry the weight of it. I was free. The next time I saw my parents, we didn't talk about business or money or the past. We just talked about our lives. And for the first time in years, I felt like we were finally having a real conversation, one that was about us, not about what we could offer each other, but about the love and respect we had for each other as individuals. We were no longer tied to the mistakes we had made. We were free to move forward. The past no longer defined us. And that, in itself, was a victory. I wasn't sure where life would take me next. But I knew one thing for sure: I had found my place in the world. I had learned that the most important thing in life wasn't success or recognition, it was love. Love for myself, love for my family, and love for the journey that had brought me here. The story I had lived wasn't just about overcoming obstacles or finding success. It was about finding peace and embracing the love that came from within. It was about healing the wounds of the past and moving forward with grace. And in that moment, I realized that love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force of all. This story teaches us the importance of healing, not only from our past but from the people we love. It reminds us that while forgiveness is crucial, self-love and acceptance are just as important. It's about reclaiming your power, standing tall, and moving forward with a heart full of understanding. It shows us that we can love ourselves and others without being defined by the mistakes of the past. True love isn't about perfection, it's about acceptance, compassion, and the courage to be who we truly are. And in the end, it's these connections, whether with ourselves or with others, that make life truly meaningful.